Alright, so if you remember on Friday we started talking about complex numbers and we said that they have the same property as real numbers, so that means that I can add them, I can subtract them, I can multiply them, I can divide them. So let's first look at the idea of addition. So when we look at this expression, every complex number has a real part, which the 5 and the 7 are, and an imaginary part. So I have 4i and 2i. They're the imaginary parts. So all I'm doing is combining my real numbers, which is 5 and 7i, or 5 and 7. And then I'm combining my imaginary part, which is 4i and 2i. So when I add 5 and 7 together, I get 12. When I add 4i and 2i, I get 6i. So now what I want to do is I want to subtract them. So I'm taking my two real numbers, 12 and 6, and I'm subtracting them. So I have 12 minus 6. And then I have negative 8i, which I'm subtracting from negative 6i. So I have a 6 plus negative 8 minus negative 6 is negative 2. So I end up with 6 minus 2i. I'm going to give you guys a couple minutes, or like 15 seconds, to try the next two questions. So the first one, we're just doing 6 plus negative 3, which gets me positive 3. Negative 7 plus negative 1i gets me negative 8i. For the next one, I have 6 minus negative 4, which is 10. And then 3 minus negative 2 gets me positive 5. So adding and subtracting is pretty easy. Now let's look at this next idea. So what I know is that when I have the square root of negative 1, that is the same thing as saying I. Okay? So, what I'm doing here is I'm taking these numbers and multiplying them. So I'm really taking 7 and distributing it through 1 minus 4i. Okay? And then I'm taking negative 3i and multiplying it by 1 minus 4i. Okay, so I take 7 times 1, I know that's 7. I take 7 times negative 4i, I get negative 28i. Negative 3i times 1 gets me negative 3i. Negative 3 and negative 4 gets me positive 12. I times I gets me I squared. So remember, I said that I is the same thing as the square root of negative 1. Well, if I want to get rid of this square root, I could square both sides, and what I find out is anytime I see negative 1, I see I squared. So that's why I combined the negative 28 and the 3i together to get negative 31i, and then I change the I squared to negative 1. So now I get 7 plus negative 12 to get me negative 5, or negative 5. So let's look at an example. What I'm doing here is I'm taking negative 2 and distributing it to the 5 and taking it to the I. So I'm taking negative 2i times 5, and then I'm taking negative 2i times I. So negative 2 times 5 is negative 10i, and then I have negative 2 times 1 gets me negative 2i squared. So I have, right now I have negative 2. I squared is the same thing as negative 1, which makes this positive 2. So we always want our real value to be first, so I end up with 2 minus 10i. So let's look at another one. So I have to take the 4 and distribute it through the negative 2 plus 6i. And then I have to take the negative I and distribute through negative 2 plus 6i. So 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. 4 times 6i is 24i. I have negative I times negative 2, which is positive 2I, plus negative 6I squared. So right now, I have negative 8 plus 26I. I squared is negative 1. So negative 6 and negative 1 make positive 6. I can combine negative 8 and 6 to get me negative 2 plus 26I. So what I'm going to do is just show the answers to the try these, but I would encourage you not to look until you're done. And then we'll talk about division. Here are your answers. And I will give you guys like 5 minutes to try these. And I will see you soon.